For the public, the hostage releases can feel like some closure, but for these hostage survivors, Romi says it's only the beginning. There is a sickness involved in the pro-Hamas movement, both in the terrorists committing these acts and people like Brianna Joy Gray who are justifying it. There's almost no coverage of the fact that medical professionals in Gaza use their positions as a shield for involvement with Hamas or were directly complicit in hostage-taking, abuse, and murder. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Off the Record. In today's media environment, especially when it comes to Israel and the Middle East, nuance has almost disappeared and complex realities are reduced to slogans or headlines, and anyone who refuses to pick a side is attacked. This show exists to slow things down, to take the hard conversation seriously, challenge misinformation, and make room for complexity without dehumanization. I'm Zina Rachamilova. Thank you for being here. Let's get into it. The story that dominated Israeli media over the weekend was the testimony of former hostage Romi Gonen, who spoke publicly for the first time on Israel's investigative program Uvda about her time in Hamas captivity. Now, I have to warn some of our viewers that some of the things we're going to discuss will be difficult, so please brace yourself accordingly. Romi Gonen was kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th of 2023 during the terror attack at the Nova Music Festival near Kibbutz Reim. As she tried to escape, she was shot and wounded and then later abducted into Gaza, where she was held for 471 days. When Hamas began firing rockets at Israel at 6:30 a.m. that morning, Romi began describing the chaos and pandemonium as she and her best friend Gaia Khalifa tried to flee the festival. We are shown never-before-seen photos and footage of Romi hiding, along with recorded conversations between her and her father as she was trying to figure out how to escape. Romi and Gaia had to leave the car that they were trying to escape in and hide in the bushes, along with another young man named Ofer Tzarfati. After waiting there for a while, another young man named Ben Shimoni pulled up his car to rescue them. Ben had already saved 9 people from the Nova Music Festival, complete strangers. On his third trip, he came to rescue Romi, Gaia, and Ophir. As the 4 of them tried to drive out of the area, they drove straight into a group of about 50 terrorists. They killed Ben first, and then Gaia. Romi describes watching her best friend Gaia take her last breath. Romi then gets on the phone with her mother, and in the recorded call you can hear Ophir and Romi's heavy breathing with the sounds of endless gunfire and terrorists screaming in the background. Ophir begs Romi to leave him and save herself. Then we hear the terrorists approaching the car while Romi plays dead, and she describes the terrorists taking her out of the car and dragging her and Ophir across the pavement into a white pickup truck. The 2 were kidnapped to Gaza. Ophir Tzarfati died in Hamas captivity, and his body was recovered by the IDF on December 1st. Romi was released on January 19th of 2025 as part of the ceasefire and hostage deal. And now, almost a year later, she has chosen to speak about what she endured in captivity, including the sexual abuse and repeated threats by her captors. Her testimony adds to the growing body of evidence that sexual violence was used against Israeli women held hostage. I don't think we'll ever fully know the true extent of what these hostages endured. Based on media reporting and the way that survivors are speaking publicly, it appears that many of them are deliberately keeping details vague. This is done for ethical and protective reasons because these are deeply personal experiences, and survivors should not have their names permanently associated with these acts online. While many are coming forward, they often speak in general terms, likely as a way to shield themselves from stigma and re-traumatization. One woman who did come forward publicly was Amit Susanna, who spoke to the New York Times about the sexual assault that she endured in Hamas captivity. Amit was kidnapped from Kibbutz Kfar Aza and was held in Gaza for 55 days. She was released in November of 2023 and became the first released hostage to speak publicly and disclose sexual assault during captivity. In the New York Times article, Amit talks about a captor named Muhammad who guarded her. She describes as he sat her on the edge of the bath. It seems to be a common theme that these hostages were harassed by their captors in the bathroom, usually while they were bathing, if you can even call it that. Amit says that she closed her legs and tried to resist her captor, but he kept punching her and put his gun on her face, and then he dragged her into the bedroom. In the article, it says that her captor forced her to perform a sexual act on him. We also know that Hamas terrorists believe that Amit was working for the Israeli military and had threatened her with violence if she didn't confess to being a military personnel. Amit at some point was held with Liri Albag, Agam Berger, and Keith and Aviva Siegel. It was actually Liri Albag who had to intervene and convince the terrorists that Amit was not working for the IDF. Amit has since said that Liri's intervention may have saved her life. Amit's story reflects some of the same terrible things that Romi Gonen talks about in her testimony. There's also stories from male hostages who were subject to sexual abuse, like Rom Braslavsky, Alon Ohel, and Guy Gilboa Dalal, who were sexually assaulted by their captors, usually in the shower. In her testimony, Romi said that there were 4 separate incidences of sexual abuse by 4 different men during her 471 days of captivity, and she describes them as different levels of severity. For many of us in Israel, the hostage releases were the most central thing to closing the painful chapter of October 7th, and we'll never truly get past it. But it was only after the hostage releases could we even really find a way to move forward, not past, but move forward. But something that Romi had said in her interview is that it has not ended for her. And we all know that the road to recovery for these hostages is a long one. And I know that this may sound obvious, but it should still be said because Romi emphasized this in her testimony. To many people around her, they feel that now that she's home, everything will be okay. We ourselves see videos of these hostages laughing and smiling and enjoying life for the first several months after their captivity. But the reality is that they're on this high after their release. They're ecstatic that they're home. Some of these released hostages are even traveling and just living life in the happiest way possible. So for the public, the hostage releases can feel like some closure. But for these hostage survivors, Romi says it's only the beginning. Romi describes living with severe trauma and post-traumatic stress, where everyday sounds can instantly transport her back to Gaza. She said that if she loses focus for even a second, then her mind can immediately take her back to captivity. She spoke about how even being in a surgery room in Israel to treat her gunshot injuries became a psychological ordeal. Remember, it was 471 days that she did not receive proper medical care for her injuries. She even said that doctors opening up a sink faucet and hearing that sound made her feel like she was being shot at. And you can imagine how severe the PTSD is for her. I know that for myself, sounds and smells can also elicit some sort of trigger. Even when I'm outside of Israel, if I hear a loud sound of an ambulance siren or a plane that's flying really low, my body feels like it's some sort of fighter jet that's flying over me. My mind may know that I'm not in Israel, but my body reacts as if it's preparing for danger. If I hear a loud sound like thunder, or if something falls over, it can sound like the Iron Dome intercepting ballistic missiles. And so we in Israel have to go through this PTSD. And so you can imagine how much worse it is for the hostages who are living under constant fear and threats and who are living under constant bombardment during their times of captivity. Now, in her testimony, Romi describes that one of the people who sexually assaulted her was a nurse. I want to play you that part of the clip.
מוחמד הדוקטור הלך, הוא היה מגיע פעם ב-24 שעות כזה, להחליף לי תחבושות ביד. עברתי כל מיני סוגים של הטרדות, מ4 גברים שונים במהלך השבי, בדרגות חומרה שונות. והסיטואציה הראשונה קרתה ביום הרביעי שלי בשבי. עוד לא התחלתי, עוד לא קרה כלום, וכבר נכנסתי למקלחת ודברים קרו.
האירוע הראשון שרומי תחשוף כאן, הפוגע הוא אותו איש צוות רפואי שמגיע מבית החולים לטפל בפציעה שלה.
אני נכנסת להתקלח, והוא הרשה עצמו להיכנס למקלחת, כי הוא אח, והוא בא לעזור לי במקלחת. ואני פצועה, ואין לי שום כוח עליהם, ואני בסיטואציה שאין לי מה לעשות בה. הוא לקח ממני הכל.
So, there you have it. 4 days into her captivity, a Palestinian nurse sexually assaulted her, while Israel was still counting its bodies and still trying to understand who was dead and who was taken captive before even one soldier set foot into Gaza. This is what was happening to Romi by medical professionals. It's very wild that such evil like this can exist, and it's wild how evil certain people are that excuse or deny or whitewash what happened to these hostages. Some of us may remember the interview with Romi Gonen's sister Yarden with American commentator Brianna Joy Gray. In the interview, Yarden begged Brianna to acknowledge what was happening to Israeli women. Let's actually watch the clip.
I really hope that you specifically will believe women when they say that they got hurt.
All right, thanks for joining. Stick around.
I remember watching that interview and just being shocked over this. You have to be a very, very terrible and disgusting person to roll your eyes at a hostage family, but rolling your eyes to a family member who is talking about their loved one being sexually attacked like this is just pure evil. Evil. Hell is not a good enough place for someone like her. It's such a sickness. There is a sickness involved in the pro-Hamas movement, both in the terrorists committing these acts and people like Brianna Joy Gray who are justifying it. Romi talked about how this nurse would pretend to treat her injuries as an excuse to sexually harass her. She said that of 4 of those incidents, the 3rd time was the most severe. She said it lasted for half an hour. He too told her to go into the bathroom and wash herself in the sink. She says that the second assault took place after the start of the IDF ground maneuver, when her captor suddenly begun to massage her, moving his hands down toward her waist. She told him to stop and moved her mattress into another room. After that, because she seemingly defied him, he told her that from now on, she sleeps in the same room as him and he escorts her to the bathroom every time, and that he plans to handcuff her from now on. And the sexual harassment continued in the days that followed. Romi says that at times there were 2 men harassing her in the same room, Muhammad and Ibrahim. She described how one of them, Muhammad, would accompany her every time she went into the bathroom and watch her, while the other man, Ibrahim, repeatedly harassed her, grabbing her by the leg, moving his hand toward her thigh. She said that despite repeatedly telling him to stop and trying to push him away, the harassment continued in one room for 16 days. And her exact words were, "It sounds like nothing, but those were the worst 16 days of my life." During that time, they would question her about her sexual history, asking who she had slept with. She had told them that she had a husband. She made up this story so that they would believe she was married. She also stopped getting her period, which terrified her because it made her believe that she might be pregnant. She said, "My biggest fear was that something had been done to me, especially within the first days of her captivity when she was in the hospital." Her captors were convinced that she had slept with her so-called husband, which she named Yarden after her sister, just days before the festival, and that may be why she was pregnant. One of them even had brought a pregnancy test and it had come back negative. Then one day they told her that they're moving her to a new place and that she should shower because they didn't know how long she'll be able to shower again. The captor follows her into the bathroom, and she says that this was the hardest instance of sexual harassment. She said it lasted half an hour, and while it was happening, she was crying uncontrollably. And she said that he was having the time of his life. It was as if he received a gift. Romi said that he then approached her with a gun and threatened her that if she ever told anyone what he had done, he would kill her. What happened was that Romi was being transferred to the tunnels, and this terrorist was trying to take one last advantage of her before she was no longer under his captivity. Now, I have no words. It's not fair what she went through. And when she describes the dissonance of looking out of the window and seeing the different world than the hell that she was experiencing in that room, I feel sick just visualizing it and thinking what she must have been feeling. It really must have been the lowest point of her life. Now, the fact that one of the men who assaulted her was a medical professional, someone tasked with treating her bullet wound, should be generating a lot of outrage, more than it has. how many more health professionals in Gaza were involved in holding hostages or in some cases killing them? Well, we have Noah Marciano, who was kidnapped from the Nahal Oz base, whose father says that she was killed by a doctor in Gaza who had injected air into her veins and then filmed it. You have Emily Damari, who is held inside the Shiva hospital by a physician who forced her to call him Dr. Hamas. Then there was a doctor named Dr. Marwan Al-Hams, who was a physician at a hospital in Rafah that handled the body of IDF soldier Hadar Golden, who was killed and kidnapped in 2014, knowing that it had been hidden in a tunnel beneath Rafah. And then we have Dr. Ahmed Al-Jamal, who was a physician that worked at a local mosque. According to some of his neighbors, he and his son Abdallah, who had written for Al Jazeera, held 3 Israeli hostages, Andrei Koslov, Shlomi Ziv, and Almog Meir Jan, in their family home in Nusrat. The 2 were known to have links to Hamas. Think about how much disinformation and propaganda we hear. And yet, there's almost no coverage of the fact that medical professionals in Gaza use their positions as a shield for involvement with Hamas or were directly complicit in hostage-taking, abuse, and murder. These were doctors and health workers who exploited the trust and the protections afforded to them under international law. The silence from major human rights organizations or much of legacy media on this issue is not neutrality. At this point, it amounts to complicity, because when terror hides behind hospital walls and the world refuses to confront it, that silence becomes part of the system that enables these crimes to continue. Romi is incredibly brave for coming forward and publicly speaking about what was done to her. The courage it takes to reveal that trauma, knowing the entire world is watching and listening, it's almost impossible to comprehend. By choosing to speak out, she's not only exposing the depth of what she endured, she is forcing us to confront the true horror of it. And her testimony should do more than just inform us. It should take the international community and compel it to reckon with how it responds to when a terror organization uses sexual violence as a weapon of war. The last 2 years have not been normal. When people come to Israel for the first time in the last 2 years and learn about the true gravity of what happened here and what these victims endured, and how we respond and deal with death and destruction, it's not normal. And yet, this has been our reality. It's awful, and it's also necessary, because the world needs to know and the world needs to act. We now have extensive documentation, including the report compiled by the Dina Project over the last 2 years, which presents some of the most undeniable evidence that Hamas used sexual violence as a weapon of war. The report draws on testimonies from Nova survivors, released hostages, and others who've lived through the massacre. It shows that rape, sexual humiliation, and genital mutilation were not random or isolated acts. They were coordinated and deliberate tactics of terror. I visited an intelligence center here in Israel where we saw handwritten instructions from former Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar directing operatives to document everything, to create images of burning kibbutzim and cities in order to instill fear in the Israeli population. And there was even a dictionary from Arabic to Hebrew telling women to take off their clothes and take off their pants. Sexual violence was part of the strategy, and Hamas used it as a weapon of war. And this leads to the broader question: how does the international community respond? How do we hold terror organizations accountable when they commit these crimes? The victims of October 7th included citizens from 35 different countries. This was not only Israel's tragedy, people across the world were affected, and that means the response should have never been Israel's burden alone. We need to have a proper global policy and responsibility, not like the failure of the United Nations, to protect populations from these mass atrocities. Any country that harbors or supports terror groups, whether they're hosting their leadership, like Qatar and Doha, or financing their operations like the Islamic regime in Iran, they must be held accountable under international law. This is about precedent. It's about ensuring that mass rape, torture, and hostage-taking cannot be outsourced to terror proxies without consequences. There must be legal and diplomatic accountability for anyone involved in these crimes. There must also be binding international protocol for hostage-taking when citizens of multiple countries are involved. 35 nationalities were affected. This should have triggered a fundamentally different global response than it did. Hamas is a non-state terror entity, and the world must develop a new framework for dealing with organizations like this, because this is not just about Israel. It's not simply about a conflict. It's about whether the international community allows terror groups to get away with crimes of this magnitude. Every terror organization around the world is watching and seeing how the world responds. This is not a moment of symbolic condemnations. This is about setting a universal standard that no human being anywhere can be used as leverage or as a sexual weapon of war. If the world fails to act, October 7th will not just be remembered as a tragedy that happened in Israel, it will become a blueprint for what terror organizations believe they can do next. And as we close today, I want to remind our viewers that today's episode was about truth, accountability, and the refusal to let human suffering be buried under silence, denial, or propaganda. What happened on October 7th and what has been revealed since through survivor testimony demands more than a standard of concern. It demands action, because when sexual violence, torture, and hostage-taking are used as tools of war and the world responds with hesitation or selective outrage, that silence becomes permission. Off the Record exists to slow the conversation down, to strip away the noise, and to insist on nuance without surrendering moral clarity. Disagreement belongs in this space. Dehumanization does not. Thank you for trusting me with these difficult conversations. Thank you for choosing to listen, even when it's uncomfortable. And thank you for refusing to look away. That's it for today's episode of Off the Record. We'll see you again next time.